Professor Seikaly has been a faculty member at Wayne since 1994, first in the Department of Near East Studies and now in the Department of CMLLC, in which Near East Studies is subsumed. He currently holds the rank of an associate professor. Her basic education is cosmopolitan and international. Her BA degree is from American University in Lebanon, which is in the Middle East. Her master's degree, so that she can prove that she's smart internationally. She came to the University of California, LA, UCLA, and got a master's there. And then she traveled across seas to England, to Oxford University, and got a PhD there. So you can imagine the academic and cultural education that she absorbed in her travels. Her research interests are also diverse within the area of social history of the Middle East. Her scope includes Middle East women, particularly empowerment and rights, immigration and diasporic communities with Middle Eastern origins, as well as using oral history to historicize undocumented Middle Eastern communities. She's become a recognized authority on oral history and its application in the Middle East and teaches in the field. As evidence of that recognition, in the last decade she has trained field researchers and oral historians in Qatar for a project on women for the Qatar National Archives. That project was completed last year. Her scholarship and work has been recognized at Wayne here and nationally and internationally. At Wayne here, she was awarded Wayne State University's Presidential Award grant, a grant for women in 2008. I remember when President Reed made that very, very unique award in recognition of her work among women in the Middle East, and she was able to go and do some research with that award. In 2010, she was awarded the Women of Wayne grant, and in 2011-12, she directed a workshop at Cambridge University in the UK for the Gulf Research Center on the Arab Spring and the democratization in the Gulf states. This has resulted in a book just published by the Gerlach Print Press of Berlin. This book is entitled The Silent Revolution, the Arab Spring and the Gulf States. And now she has just been appointed senior researcher for the European Parliament on a project entitled The Situation of Women in the Gulf States. So you're here in the presence of a highly recognized scholar in her field. As director of the Humanities Center, I am very grateful to Professor May for being a very consistent friend and supporter of the Humanities Center over the years. Evidence of this friendship is her participation in this Brownback series, where she offers her opinions and analyses for public scrutiny and comment. In December 2012, she gave a Brownback talk entitled The Arab Spring, a Catalyst for Democratic Change in the Arab Gulf. In October 2010, she gave a lecture entitled The Modern Politics of Gender in the Gulf States. In March 2009, she gave a lecture entitled Globalizing Gender in the Arabian Gulf. And in 2002-2003, she was a member of a working group. So I'm very grateful for her support of this center in those ways. So please help me to welcome to the podium with a generous applause Professor May Seikaly.
Thank you very much, Professor Edwards. And the center has always been very kind to all of us faculty here, and we have made full use of the great services you have provided us. And particularly this kind of brown meetings, brown bag meetings, where we expose our research, our work, and listen to colleagues when they come. And I'm happy to see Professor Mark Truman here, and all the others who come. But my students are mostly, I'm very happy to have you all with me today. Okay, today our talk, as we mentioned, is the struggle for democracy in the Arabian Gulf. And I will be talking about particularly the book that has come out just recently. Today, in fact, I heard from Gerlash saying that the book is out. Unfortunately, it's very expensive, and that's why if you need to know any of its parts, ask me rather than to go to and pay 80 euros for the book. They gave us a break, but until the end of this month of 50% only us contributors. I have another contributor to this book, and this is Abu Samra, the Reem, who has written on identity. So my students got involved in that. I have another student who was with me who also contributed another article. I try my best in order to bring out students in order to expose their research. Like today, Sura Shlebah is with us today, who has written on the Saudi ban on women driving. And she will contribute to our discussion today to show how legislation of laws, of democratizing life is so important in the region of the Gulf, and particularly this situation is unique to Saudi Arabia because in other areas of the Gulf, women drive. It's only unfortunately in Saudi Arabia where they are obstinate, and consistently have blocked the possibility of women driving. Okay, so this is the latest book, and I will be concentrating particularly on that. And as the title of the book shows, the Gulf region, while muting and silencing objections and revolts in the atmosphere of the Arab Spring since late 2010 to 2011, when it was really in heat, the whole region, they tried to mute it, to silence it, and however, the truth is that it was there. It arrived to the shores of the Gulf. How are they dealing with it? And it still is simmering in various areas. In some areas it is inflamed, like in Bahrain. In other areas it bursts out every now and then, such as the eastern region of Saudi Arabia, and sometimes in Yemen and in other regions of the Gulf. The Arab Spring, or I want to be careful how I call it Arab Spring, because this is really a misnomer in many ways. It has been accepted by the people who really started the movement, saying, okay, like the European Spring, right? But in fact, it is not a one event in the whole history of the region. We have to look at the events that I call the uprisings, rather than the Arab Spring. But I still use the Arab Spring because everybody else understands it. These events have happened in an atmosphere that have accumulated to really burst. And that's how we have to look at it. In this book, we trace, there are 9 contributors, including Reem, there is Basma, who is also our student, and 7 others, international writers from Britain, Australia, South Africa, the UAE, so it is international writers, as well as one from Bahrain, my Khawla Matar, who is my co-editor of this. We trace the impact and significance of events connected with the Arab Spring. These uprisings that took place in the Gulf and we concentrate on the significance of that to the oil-producing nations, and as a consequence on the world economy. This impacts it. I mean, since the Arab Spring, the world has been shaken. It's not the same. Become pragmatic, practical, and look at issues. Things have altered. It has altered the Middle East, at this moment to the worst. There is nothing that could be worse than Syria. There is nothing that really could explain the lack of solutions in Bahrain. But these are conditions, and if we look at international and human experience of revolts, these are processes, and they go on until a certain frame is reached and some kind of consensus is. I will be very brief because it will be impossible for me and Sura to cover everything I would like to. Anybody who wants to ask questions, we'll do it afterwards, or if you want to stay, I was given the approval and to stay over with my students afterwards. So anybody who wants to continue discussing will do that. These 9 chapters investigate what is always seen as unanswered questions in the Gulf. That Gulf societies and Gulf governments have labored under very critical issues since independence. Please note that the Gulf has not been independent from colonial rule a very long time ago. Kuwait took its independence in 61. All the other Gulf states took it in 71. Of course, Saudi Arabia is a special case where even then it was a family controlling with a lot of British influence, okay? So the region for a very long time was the hegemon of the Raj, of the British government. And colonial aspects of that were very clear in the workings of the governments that took over after that. So I will drastically summarize what I want to say and try to show where the most ferocious impacts of the uprisings were in the Gulf and how they have been dealt with. The historical framework for this presentation and my work on it is based on the article number 1 of the book, which is mine, okay? And where I question the questionable process for reform. Why was reform continuously promised in the Gulf states and then fabricated not to be given? No reforms. In fact, if you look at all aspects of these societies, they are developed financially, they are developed globally. I'll give you pictures to see about that. But when it comes to the aspect of sharing power, accepting representation, providing the citizens with a say, these governments have been obdurate in not taking a step in that. And this is really the crux of what we are talking about in this book. In fact, there is one article in this book by Toby Matheson, who is incredibly concrete and clear because he takes the biggest elephant in this room, which is Saudi Arabia, and he takes the cases, very particular cases of continuous disruptions from Sunni and Shi'i, from ulama and otherwise, asking for change, some form of democratization, some leeways, but none is forthcoming. Today, we hear in the news about Bandar being put out of power, which is incredibly good because he was the security man and the major, he used to be the ambassador to America. But the fact is that obviously after the visit of Obama to Saudi Arabia, changes are going to happen, some form. And we who look at, intellectuals who look at this issue from other side, hope for serious changes. In my article, I face this issue and I call it a process between, aspiration, hope, and desperation, because there are so many blocks that are faced. And it is all framed into the structure of the Arab Gulf. Events of the Arab Spring events, and how did the Gulf rulers look at these events? We'll go through them very briefly in order to really formulate what lesson could such events, and they were momentous, huge. Anybody, I hope you were all there in 2011 and 12 when Tahrir Square was filled with people. Anybody who saw that should have known that there is a reason for people to go out in this way. And are these reasons valid? Are these reasons met? And how? So let us look at the Arab Spring. These are the governments that are overthrown, changed seriously. Oman is in the Gulf, Yemen is in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia is not mentioned, although there were Twitters and Twitters of issues going on. Even Kuwait experienced some. Bahrain, this little tiny place, experienced a lot. Kuwait is here, Bahrain is here. The UAE, very rare, and Qatar, very little, but there were, and I'll talk about them when the time comes. So this really gives us a good summary frame of events that happened. So this is 1/3 of the world that was in upheaval between 2011 and 2013, okay? 2011-12, Arab uprisings in Tunisia. This is Tahrir Square, Libya, and Yemen. Yemen is in the Gulf, okay? Just the amount of people is enough to let us understand that people felt empowered by themselves. So, 2010-2014, I put you notes here to make it easier to explain. And for those of you, my students, if you want to take notes, you can. It is good. But what is the reason? Accumulated grievances. Many. The accumulated grievances were mostly economic. People were hungry in areas where they were wealthy too. The comprador accumulation of wealth in Egypt is terrible in comparison to people who cannot find a place to sleep and live in the cemeteries. So that should give us something to think about. These movements were unprecedented, not necessarily so, but in their momentum, in their size, in their bold demands. We demand of the downfall of the ruler. These are not usual. They were very vocal. They broke the barrier of fear, which had always been. Anybody who has read the Economist article of 2009 on the sleeping Arab world will understand this. That article tells it all. The Arab world was sleeping. Education was horrendous. The level of literacy was terrible. The gap between the poor and the rich was incredible, and that's why 10 months later we have the uprisings. They didn't come out of void. It was call for transformation. We the people demand. The slogans were the reality, challenging dictatorships for a democratic change. The background, look at it. Economic deprivations, social marginalization, very clear. Political oppression, no democracy, none. Youth were growing. Unemployment. Saudi Arabia has the highest unemployment today. Note that. Also, educational needs. Even though education was really on the upsurge, but there were indeed savage globalization, neo-colonial economies, control of the World International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. This, we saw it in Egypt, very clear, it's been written about, you can all read about that, okay? And globalization was taking many forms, as I explained to my students. It is an economic, it's a physical globalization, but it also impacts the social and other aspects. Now, how did they come in sequence? Tunisia started, Egypt followed, and then Libya. It creeped east, Yemen was number 4, and Bahrain within the Gulf. Then we have the center of the Arab world was Syria, which is until today unresolved. Bahrain is unresolved. Yemen is not completely clear, but Libya is lawlessness. We don't know what's going on and what's going to come. So, but there were common grounds and differences. Economy. The wealthy and the poor states, the people were complaining of economic deprivations. People were complaining about no participation, no equality, and demand for dignity. These are, in a nutshell, the issues. Over popular demands, rights of all the people to full membership as citizens and participants in their systems of rule. You see, the government tried to, the Gulf governments tried to tell the people, oh, you are ra'aya, you are followers, we take care of you, we are paternalistic. But the people were beginning to say, no, we want citizenship. We want to be not ra'aya, not followers, but our own choosing the rights. This is the voice that is coming out. So almost 4 years later, 2014, we have now a definite turmoil. The Arab Spring has not brought solutions. It has brought revolutions, turmoil, processes, hopefully for better, but it's overwhelming economic distress. Anybody reads new articles on Egypt puts you to tears. Turmoil and slow return to normalcy everywhere. In some parts, like Tunisia, there is more normal coming back. When you go to Libya, it's lawlessness and no rule of law, I mean, which is very scary. I don't advise anybody going there. So now we come to the Arabian Gulf. There is something missing here. I don't know. Okay. Fine. I wanted to show you the map so that you will really understand the setting we are talking about. This is Bahrain, where it is quite central, a very important base for the Americans. United Arab Emirates, the wealthiest countries in the Gulf are Qatar, tiny, lots of gas. The Emirates, particularly Abu Dhabi, not necessarily Dubai, although Dubai is the more exuberant. Oman is not wealthy, but is managing. Bahrain is very poor, but is dependent on Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Okay? So that you can understand the structure of the countries we're dealing with. Now, I put Dubai for you, just to give you an example of the physical as well as, you know, I think Dubai is most spectacular globalization and expression of wealth and power. It is both the physical as well as who lives in it. Who are the Dubiani people? They make up 8% of the population. 8. And 92% are foreign imports of all nationalities, many Americans who are holding the highest echelons of jobs. Many poor, downtrodden Bangladeshi, Pakistani, and others who are in the building industries, who built all these towers. Incredible. I lived in one of them at some point when I was doing my research on women. It's incredible and not normal and strange. But that's what it is. That's globalization. That's my impression. I mean, I'm telling you. How was the impact of, you have to stop me so that I can give you enough time. Okay. How was it in the Gulf? First of all, because the Gulf states are very wealthy, political clout and authoritarianism, the Arab Spring bestowed on them a status. They became the negotiators. They helped in money, in arms, in fighters, whether in Egypt, in Libya. They were negotiators of the solutions of the Arab Spring. So it gave them clout and power and first-hand knowledge of what is the Arab Spring. How do we deal with it? Okay? So if you read this, sorry, I won't be able to read it all myself, but read it to help you, understand. Saudi Arabia and Qatar were at the forefront, followed by the UAE. They came to the rescue of Egypt and Libya and Syria, most significantly in Bahrain. What did they do in Bahrain? When the revolt started, and the revolt started in Bahrain by both Sunni and Shi'i oppositional groups. What did they do? They sent armies. Saudi Arabia sent the GCC army, particularly it is Saudi, later on UAE also, because they were worried. This is existential. Saudi Arabia was really worried. Existential fear, security, and paranoia. It's paranoid from Iran, from its neighbors, and therefore now Iraq is not a threat. At some point it used to be, and therefore these are reasons why. What did happen within the Gulf? There were demonstrations, street, in Saudi Arabia, in Oman, in Kuwait, in the UAE, and in Qatar. Street demos, some very strong. Strongest were in Yemen and in Bahrain. And why? Because they are the poorest. The economic, immediately, this big power, Saudi Arabia, just expended money, co-opted the voices of those who were in the street. It would be lovely to get $500 extra on your salary every month. That's what happened to everybody in Saudi Arabia. And more recently, more. So you have to understand, money pays. People have to live. Kuwait, which has a much longer history of democratization than any of the others, Kuwait also had to dampen the voices of the opposition, who are very politicized in Kuwait, and spend money. Reform, social justice were the slogans. The forms and intensity of reactions were variant. There were deaths that we saw in Oman, in Saudi Arabia, the eastern region, but the worst were in Yemen and Bahrain. Yemen, at one go, yesterday there was a program in one of the squares. The snipers, government snipers, killed 50 young men and even children. So there is a lot too. This is the Arab Spring in the Gulf, so that you do not think it was not full with people. It was. This is Bahrain. It was in a square called the Pearl Square. And when everybody was thrown out of it, they destroyed, because it became a symbol of the opposition, they destroyed even the whole pearl that was there and they destroyed the government. In Yemen, this is one of the very famous women who got the international award for supporting, there were men and women and children were out in the streets in Yemen. In Kuwait, it was on a smaller scale, but there were demonstrations. I'm sorry I couldn't get much for many of the others. Saudi Arabia is very difficult to get pictures of the demonstrations. You might have, Amal, some. I couldn't get any in order to show that they did happen. I'm trying to tell you that they did happen. And they were squashed. So again, we look at that just to refresh your ideas, that the Arab Spring was also significant in the Gulf region. Okay. These are the countries in the Gulf, in Kuwait, in Oman, in Yemen, Saudi Arabia particularly here, but other places here, The Arab Spring exposed the Gulf. Bahrain, Yemen, Oman were best publicized. I'm talking about media. The main media, which is Al Arabiya and Al Jazeera, are government controlled, owned by corporates, by families of the Gulf, as one of our articles in the book shows very clearly, Khawlas. It is incredible how much what we think is objective is not. Al Jazeera plays a game. But it has also exposed many cases. I don't want you to completely put you off them. But on the other hand, when it comes to that, they played the role of the governments that supports, that pays their money. Okay? Oh, sorry. Most of my work comes from oral history, from interviews that I did with people, as well as from Arab media, although I have used quite a lot in my work Western literature, but I depend quite a lot on the media and newspapers of the Arab world in order to give me day by day. You have to understand that the demands are the same economy. There are poor Gulf people, as I call them Gulfies. In Yemen, anybody who's written anything about Yemen knows about poverty in Yemen. Bahrain, I lived in Bahrain and I can tell you, the village side is horribly poor. And even in Saudi Arabia. In the UAE, Saudi Arabia, there has been international reports on poverty in Saudi Arabia. Anybody who is interested, I can refer you to things, okay? But just send me things slowly and I'll send you where to look for. The UAE, personally, because I did quite a lot of interviews, you go out from Dubai, a little bit, an hour and a half north, to Ras Al Khaimah, to Al Quwain. Poverty is clear. You see it. Not as terrible as I saw it in Bahrain, or I see it in Yemen, but there is, okay? People were demanding participation, calls for justice, for economic, political transparency, freedom of expression, and the people were versus the governments. Is the Gulf immune to these demands? This is what the Gulf would like us to know, that they are impervious to what is going on, as though the demands of the people is nothing. Why? There is a history. I don't want you to be under the impression that the Gulf people have never asked for democratization. I worked on it, and there is a whole history. This is the history before the Arab Spring of the Gulf, who struggled against authoritarian rule. They have labor movements as early as the 1920s, when pearling was the only means of livelihood, where the pearl divers revolted and demonstrated against the ruling family, the Seikaly families, and against the British, demanding legislation. These are simple people who said nothing can control this except legislation, because in Islamic law we know, legislate the law. So there was, in 1938, an assembly movement in Dubai, Kuwait, and Bahrain that was all over asking for rights to participate. They asked the rulers. They said, we want to know where does the money come from and where does it go to? That was before oil became very important. Within that period, oil became important. And then the rulers shut up and told them, don't come near us, we can control whatever there is. In the 1950s, there was an anti-colonial Nasserite era that affected the new generation of Gulf people, okay? In the 1950s, okay? A younger generation, intellectuals and political parties were created. I'll talk about it too. 1970s was the independence. Now, the new rulers who were made to rule these countries, in Bahrain, in Kuwait, in Qatar, wanted the approval of their people, and they promised them. They promised them, okay, you have been demanding, we'll give you constitutions. I'll have to end very fast. Then there was the Iranian Revolution, there were the Gulf Wars, and the Arab Spring version in the Gulf. I'm going to go through these pictures. These are the earliest people who demanded constitutional rights and a say in their governments in the Gulf. Okay? The first group is in the 20s, the second group is in the 50s. This is the Nasserite era, which impacted everybody. These are the new rulers of today in the Gulf. These are the people who are dealing, look at the wealth, who are dealing with the. So, can the Gulf regimes manage this legacy? Where to from here? We have dilemmas of the people facing the dilemma. Can I give up all the wealth that is given to me? And you see, because now they are paid to accept, instead of power, instead of a say, money. Or shut up, accept. And this is the dilemma of many. Distributive economic benefits. Hard to dismiss, but they are encouraged by a patriarchal approach of regimes and payoffs, promotion of divisive tactics of sectarianism and ethnocentrism. There is an advanced stage of social media tools. Youth, globalization, the double-edged weapon, all the media of the youth, and reappearance of local intellectual strata, thinkers and writers with oppositional voices. Reaction has been direct co-optation, payoff, but still persistent with the same hopes and aspirations. In fact, the rest of my talk is particularly about this, but since I do not have too much time, I'm going just to give you some of those pictures that, before we go back to. In fact, there is a movement that has still been alive. In fact, I just received today by email some of the people of the intellectuals, Gulf intellectuals, who have created committees, جمعية التنمية. So many organizations are out demanding some form of a breakthrough, whether it is going to be gradual, whether we ask for a monarchical constitution and a legislation, but everybody is agreed there should be constitutional laws, legislative laws written, printed, by which the ruler is bound in order to create a modernized world. How can they be globalized? This is the incredible paradox of a globalized, as you saw, Dubai, and a people who cannot even have a vote. Voting is given, but it is all format. And for that reason, I'm going to ask Sura to talk about the ban on women driving in Saudi Arabia, which is one basic human right that needs legislation and is obdurate. Okay. That's yours. I'm taking everything.
Specifically to the driving ban within Saudi Arabia, there is no official law in Saudi Arabia that says women can't drive. However, this was the Ministry of Interior institutionalized a driving ban in November 6, 1990. This was around the time that the Gulf War is happening. And 50 women met at a supermarket in Riyadh. They dismissed their drivers and they started driving in the streets of Riyadh. And within the days of the demonstration in Riyadh, the Ministry of Interior passed the driving ban, and in order to ensure that there's no repeat of these demonstrations, they banned women from all future political activity and called for punishment. And this punishment came about by dismissing women that held teaching positions. They were fired, and any woman that partook in the demonstration was humiliated by having her name publicly announced, and the demonstration was decreed an act of infidelity against Islam. Like Professor Seikaly talked about before on the Arab Spring, it spread like wildfire within the Arab world, and each nation was inspired by another to demand for their rights. Saudi Arabia is unique in its activist movement. It can't be compared to Egypt or its neighbor Yemen, but there is a social movement within Saudi Arabia. The women within Saudi Arabia recognize the political opportunity which the Arab Spring provided them, and they have the I Will Drive Myself campaign, and they proclaimed us women in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia are the ones who will lead the society towards change. And they did this by voicing their basic right to drive. They want to uplift the ban. And they did this by going out and driving in the streets. And there are countless fatwas or religious decrees that say that by a Saudi Wahhabi scholar who adhered to the Salafi tradition of Islam that condemn women from traveling without a mahram, which is a male guardian. And there's gender segregation within Saudi Arabia. So this really hinders the women's movement, and the driving ban is stable within this, Wahhabi ideology. So the I Will Drive Myself campaign the women directly address the king, and they call for his support in their endeavor to drive. The king has not issued a statement that supports them, but he hasn't issued a statement that's against the campaign. And this campaign began in 2011, in June 2011. They took the wheels of the car, and traffic police did stop them. The male guardians, the mahrams, were asked to sign a pledge that forbids their woman from driving, and the woman herself had to sign this pledge. In one case, the Jeddah Criminal Court sentenced a woman to 10 lashes, but this was uplifted. And the government, you could see, is taking very hesitant steps in dealing with this driving campaign, very different from the 1990 movement. Also, I just want to say that it's not just women that are against the driving ban. Males within Saudi Arabia are also against it. Abdullah Al-Alami, he's a prominent Saudi author, he spoke to CNN about this, and he said that many males feel that it's crucial to uplift the ban. He also acknowledged that there's a large presence of ultra-conservatives that seek to suppress the activists, and they want to keep Saudi Arabia locked in a rigid society, and they're met with opposition. Unlike the 1990s opposition, though, the 2011 and beyond movement of trying to lift the driving ban, they have a global audience, and this comes about from social media via Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And these women are using it. They post videos of themselves driving, and we're noticing through these videos a change in society's norms. They're getting peace signs. People from males within Saudi Arabia are giving them peace signs, thumbs up, and clapping for them. And they're using Twitter to voice out their grievances, and Facebook too. And this illustrates the activism that's going on in the region. And the government's hesitant steps in dealing with this illustrates that they recognize the political instability within the region. And that's why they are not taking such a harsh step as they did in the 1990 demonstration. And we can't ignore that there's this global audience via the social media too.
Well, in conclusion, this is definitely the situation at this time. It is still in a state of turmoil generally, but there are signs, I think, don't you agree?
Yeah.
That change in terms of legislation are on the way. The Arab Spring, even though cannot provide all the requests of the Arab Spring, changing of governments, direct, but there are definitely changes step by step. There is already, because I am closely associated with what's going on in Bahrain, there are steps now that seems to be trying to ameliorate the huge break between the societies in Bahrain and to find certain solutions. The Arab Spring will continue to have influence, or the spirit of the Arab Spring, the ideas of people wanting participation, a role, a say, is a must. It is there, even if things do not happen right away. They are there. Thank you.
Questions, comments? Go ahead.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. In the title of the presentation, it says "Struggle for Democracy," and I'm wondering why it is that apparently you would believe that the end route to these struggles is democracy, because political change can go in many different directions. What was spoken about today seemed to be more liberalization than democratization, which is a different sort of process. Moreover, more than half the countries in the world, if we look at any sort of standard democratization index, are authoritarian regimes of various shades. So, I mean, if we look at just the numbers, there's a sort of 50-50 chance that the end road of any kind of changes here in this region is a different type of authoritarian regime. And, there are many different types of authoritarian regimes these days. If you look at the models in Belarus and Russia, or if you look at the models in China or elsewhere in the world. So the question is this actually democratization, or is this just change towards a different type of authoritarian order?
Well, in fact, the requests by people are particularly towards the utopia, which is democracy. As you said, democracy is somewhere there, which, particularly in the Gulf region, has been looked at as hoped for, despair for, but definitely they have experienced, altered and reformulated authoritarianism, as did happen in the last 10 to 15 years of our watching what has happened in Bahrain particularly, where new formulas, new symbolisms are imported to give the shape of more say, but it is another authoritarian structure, as you said, it is in many other places of the world. However, there is still the strata at the bottom who have been thinking in the same line. Like in Bahrain, I'll give you an example. One of the methods used by the government is to employ in very high positions women, Shi'i women, who are of the smallest minority, okay? To give the idea that here we're giving you a say. The economic comprador of the region are made up of both, because their interest is not basically, a Shi'i Sunni. Their interest is basically the money. And they are not fighting for participation or free elections, even free elections. Furthermore, the other minorities, I'm giving you an example of Bahrain, which I know closely. There is a very minute Christian minority in Bahrain, maybe altogether 300 people. There is a minutest Jewish minority, maybe 200 people. A woman, Christian woman, is the ambassador of Bahrain in London. The ambassador to the United States is a Jewish woman. So they're hitting at both the gender, as well as the community, as well as cosmopolitanism, as well. So, these are not celibate, of course. People are not sold such issues. But there are many layers of reformulating authoritarianism and control. And they are practiced. Now, you take Saudi Arabia. Today there has been a change. There are changes in names, but they are all the ruling family. Everywhere in the Gulf, and I agree with you, but I was talking about the narrative of the intellectuals who are looking for changes in the path towards a democratic change. There has been organizations who have been alive for the last 33 years, whose motto and purpose is basically to have democratization. But in their discussions and in their writings, and I can refer you to these nadawat and groups both in Qatar, in the UAE, in Bahrain. I have interviewed these people. I've been to their meetings, to their diwaniyas, to their special meetings, where they understand they cannot get democratization. I mean, people are not naive, but they understand that they can work towards a path of loosening the control of the family, of the ruling little elites, by slowly demanding rights, legislative, writing laws, and so on. But they are aware it is not a solution, although we still maintain it because this is the intellectual aim. I don't know if I answered you, but this is what it is. Yes?
Like you said about poverty in the UAE and how you see that once you go outside the metropolitan area, is that poverty for Emiratis, or is that poverty for
Even Emiratis.
expatriates?
Expatriates is blatant. They live in Zincos, in Ras Al Khaimah, where I have been. But you go to Emirati living quarters, and where I was invited, and you see the differences. These are countries that are subsidized strongly. In Bahrain, it's very clear. You don't need to do much travel. Just go to the villages. Go to the areas that are outside the services of the state. I lived in Bahrain. They used to have poor areas covered with what we call it hizam al-fuqr, where they put placards with pictures on them where you could not see beyond. This is Gulf country.
And just a follow-up question, you know, it's been in the media about the expatriate workers that died in Qatar building facilities for the 2022 World Cup.
Well,
I
that is-
know that that's different this time, but because it's created so much publicity, do you think Qatar will respond? Because nobody
They are responding. No, they are. I mean, they are very smart in Qatar. They are responding, they're putting legislation. No, they said, you know, the problem with labor is not only the Gulf country itself. It is also, the Gulf country is the host, okay? And the government, under the name of laissez-faire economy, you know, they accept companies. But nowadays they're putting rules on how these companies can bring workers and what are the rights. It is also the countries of the workers, India, Bangladesh, Thailand, China. I mean, you go to Dubai, there is a Chinatown, Chinese workers, okay? These countries have to also accept the fact that remuneration is not everything you should expect. You have to do agreements with the Gulf states on how and why, and, you know, I mean, I worked in the Gulf where they took my passport. I worked at university as a professor, and my passport was not with me. I demanded it when I had a family crisis and I had to leave. I told them in the middle of the night, now get me my passport. They control people. You see, these are new countries, and the significance of wealth has not yet been properly. But I have to say, they're coming on. Qatar is trying. Not in every sense, but in some. The UAE also has now, there are regulations where you cannot take passports from employees and so on. No, there are. It is coming, but
bit by bit?
yes.
I just had a quick question. When they take
Can you lower?
yeah, when they take the passport from workers or anybody that's working there, where would you go to get your passport back to where you have it as a right to where you?
I don't know on which country you're talking. I am talking about
like-
40 years ago when I was working in Bahrain.
Oh, okay.
I don't think they do it anymore. Okay?
Like UAE, for example, like they're still doing it there.
Depending on where you are working. Are you working with a company? Sometimes the company that brings in workers takes the passports. Sometimes they don't. It depends. I mean, people who work in these countries have to know their rights very clearly and what are the regulations of that country. So in the UAE, I would imagine people have their own passports. I don't think
No, I
they
just
hoard
heard a
passports
recent story
nowadays.
Where one of the workers was holding, one of the
employees.
he was holding a passport for somebody and.
Oh yeah. I mean, strange things happen,
I
but
don't know where to go to get that back, like as a right for them.
oh, I tell you, 40 years ago when this happened to me, or 35 years ago when this happened to me, in the middle of the night, I banged the whole town to wake up the president of the university to get me my passport. So you have to know where your passport is. Any questions? My students, you don't have? Yes, Tyler.
About the driving, the driving ban. Are there conservative women who are against the rescinding of the ban, or that are not in favor of driving, or are all women kind of on board across? the spectrum?
No, not all women are for it.
Okay.
So there's the conservative religious women that are not for it. But
There must be, but it would not be so bold and loud, and it will never be from the younger generation type. Maybe some, but not significant. What do you think, Amal? Amal is our Saudi representative here.
Well, a lot of women are against it because of the whole situation of Saudi Arabia. Because it's not safe to drive right now.
Right. And they are against the ban. They want women to drive.
No, against the idea of driving.
Oh, they are. There are some
Yeah,
people are.
they want to
Yeah.
to
It's-
change the society a little bit to accept it, and
Right.
then
Yeah. In other words, they are afraid to drive in case they would be attacked
yeah.
as women. Yeah. Yeah, but definitely women are at the forefront. You know, I work a lot on women. Women at the forefront of these societies for change. They are the ones who are demanding constitutional changes. They want things written down of the rights or how they can do or not do and so on. So women are very important, and Saudi Arabia is recognizing that because in more recent years there have been many more women given a say into things in the Shura Council, at universities, in banks, in the economic sector. There is quite a lot of women who are very vocal and capable and are, you know, have shown. Yeah. Do you mind if we stay a little
No,
bit
no,
longer
that's fine,
after?
that's fine.
After you? If you need any other questions, you can say.
Will you give it to her?
No, I just had it there. When she gets
That one, we need two.
okay, I'll go to the name.
You wanna? Anyone of you want to talk?